Welcome back to Alien Love Stories. Tonight I have something truly bizarre to share, but promise me, you won't laugh until the espresso starts talking back. Have you ever worked in a place so normal, so uneventful, that even spilled milk felt like a plot twist? That was me, just a barista, making oat milk lattes for people who said thanks like it hurt, cleaning whipped cream nozzles with more passion than I put into my dating life, and slowly forgetting what emotions tasted like. I worked at a cafe called The Drip Zone. The name wasn't ironic. Nothing ever happened until she walked in. Or, I should say it. I still don't know which pronoun fits. But let's rewind 30 seconds. It was Tuesday. Always is in stories like these. Rain outside. Acoustic indie playlist inside. One loyal customer pretending to write a screenplay. One scone refusing to sell for the fourth day in a row. Then the door opened. A woman walked in, or appeared to be a woman. Tall, strange skin tone. Not tan, not pale, but iridescent. Like someone pressed a rainbow through soft fog. Hair? Not really hair. More like thin strands of liquid mercury braided with static. Eyes? Don't get me started. They were crying, but not in a human way. Tears rolled down her cheeks in slow glowing spheres, each one leaving a faint musical chime as it fell. Like sorrow had a soundtrack, and she was its instrument. She walked to the counter. No words, just stared at the menu. I did what any underpaid barista would do. Hi there, can I get you started with a drip coffee or... She raised a finger, a single slow gesture, then pointed at the espresso machine and whispered, something bitter. I blinked. Double shot? With water? Americano? She nodded. I turned to make it. Steam hissed, coffee poured, and then a tear, one of those glowing, chiming tears, fell right into the shot glass. It fizzed slightly, and then stopped glowing. I turned around. She was gone. Gone. No door sound. No goodbye. No receipt. Just a half-glowing espresso and a barista questioning his caffeine intake. Later that day, a customer came in. Regular, finance guy. Always orders an cortado and flirts with the tip jar more than with me. I was distracted, so I accidentally gave him the tier espresso instead. He looked at it, took a sip, paused, eyes widened. He dropped the cup and said, voice trembling, buy stock in cucumber futures. And don't wear the red shirt tomorrow. You'll regret it. Then he left. Fast. Like he'd seen a ghost. Or a Reddit comment that came true. The next day he returned, wearing blue. Dude, he whispered, you saved me. The red shirt I was going to wear, turns out it had a wasp nest sewn inside. Some kind of prank gone wrong. I owe you. Also, cucumbers? Spiked 600% overnight. WTF? I stared at the espresso machine, at the now empty shot glass, and felt something shift, something buzz, like the machine had absorbed the truth, or maybe the tear had programmed reality itself. That night I stared into the closing register. Whispers came from the steamer. Not voices, just hisses of things I might have forgotten. Don't touch the next cup unless you want to see yourself. The future brews bitter if you're not careful. Ask her why she was crying. I turned off the lights and whispered, I would, if she ever came back. If a stranger's tear turned your coffee into a glimpse of the future, would you drink it? Would you serve it? Or would you try it on yourself first? Let me know below, and next time, I'll tell you what happened when I finally took a sip and saw that in every future, I was still alone. If you were told your coffee could predict the future, would you take it black or with emotional damage? 3 days after the glowing tear incident, my cafe was different. Not spiritually different. Not aura different. I mean, there were people. Like lines. Real humans standing in line who weren't influencers doing fake laptop poses near plants. It started with one post. A customer named Travis, he of the cucumber prophecy, posted on his dating app bio, barista read my future through espresso. I lived. Putta. That's all it took. The next morning, people showed up with tarot cards, crystals, cats in backpacks. One guy brought a sword, in case the prophecy says I must duel my ex. A woman in full wedding dress asking if she should still say yes at 3 p.m. I stared at all of them and said the only thing I could think of. So do you want oat milk with that? How it worked, I don't know, truly. But when I made an espresso, something happened. Just a flicker. The coffee swirled longer. The crema danced weirdly. Then the customer would take one sip and freeze, eyes wide, then mumble something like, I need to call my mother. Don't trust the guy with the broccoli tattoo. Moved to New Zealand, but only after the thunder. And they'd leave. Then it'd happen, exactly as they said. The wedding dress lady. She came in on Thursday, ordered a triple ristretto, looked me dead in the eyes and said, if this shows me a broken marriage, I'm walking out of the venue. I nodded like this was a normal thing to hear at 8:42 a.m. She drank, paused, whispered, he's cheating, with our efficient. Then she left. 1 hour later, I got a Yelp review. Woke me up faster than caffeine. Canceled my wedding. Bought a llama, 5 stars. The cafe transformed. We renamed the espresso the Insight Shot. Some took it like communion. Some wept. Some proposed marriage to their own shadows. One man burst into dance, screaming, I finally know why I like velvet. It was intense, but I kept one rule. I never drank it, not once, until a Tuesday came, a new Tuesday, and I was alone in the cafe. No customers, no noise, just me. The espresso machine was quiet, but it felt like it was watching, or waiting. I stared at the cup in my hand. Just a little shot, brown, velvety, innocent. Smelled like possibility and danger. So I drank it. One sip, nothing, at first. Then, the world tilted, time pulsed, the air hummed, and my reflection in the window spoke back. You're still alone. Then it showed me 100 versions of myself. Old me, feeding pigeons. Young me, moving apartments solo. Midlife me, learning to tango with a robot out of boredom. Me on a moon colony, still swiping left, all smiling, all surrounded by people, but never holding anyone's hand, not once. I dropped the cup. It didn't break, but something inside me cracked. I sat there for hours, maybe minutes. What do you do when your own coffee tells you the thing you've always suspected is absolutely true? Then the whisper came from behind me, faint, not human. You saw it, didn't you? I turned around. No one there. Just the machine. The steam wand hissing faintly. Another whisper. There's a reason you're always the one brewing, not drinking. I stood shivering. Was I imagining this? Or was someone, something, speaking through the crema? I cleaned the counter, locked up, went home, tried to sleep, dreamed of futures that never kissed me back, of chairs always with one cushion, of photos with someone always cropped out. And in the dream, I saw her again, the woman with the glowing tears. But this time, she wasn't crying. She was smiling and mouthing the words, you weren't supposed to drink it. They say if you stare into the void long enough, it stares back. But they never warned me that sometimes the void is hiding in your coffee grinder, and it might flirt with you. I stopped making espresso for a day, just to see if it would stop whispering. The world didn't end, but it got quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes refrigerators sound philosophical. Even Charlie, our cafe cat, who only shows up when someone's about to cry, refused to enter the kitchen. I stood in front of the espresso machine, unplugged, lifeless, but it still looked at me like it missed me. And that was the first time I realized I was scared to turn it back on. Flashback. The tear. The memory of that glowing tear kept looping. The sound it made when it hit the espresso, like a single piano key pressed underwater. And the way the crema reacted, not just swirling, but expanding, like it had absorbed a secret, and maybe a being. Number, that's insane. Machines can't house consciousness, right? Right? I plugged it back in. The lights flickered once. The machine shuddered, then hummed, but not like before. This hum had intonation, tone, like breathing. Then the display flashed. Welcome back. I stepped back. Nope. It blinked again. Should not have drunk the truth. I laughed nervously. Okay, this is a prank. Very elaborate. I bet Travis is behind this. Travis is in the lobby, pretending to read a book. I ran to the front. Travis was, in fact, in the lobby, holding a book upside down. When he saw me, he panicked. Don't blame me, I just came back for a cortado. I squinted. What's the book called? He looked down. How to Look Innocent When You've Been Informed by a Coffee God. I froze. Get out. He fled. Later that night, I returned to the machine. It was glowing faintly now. Not just the display. The entire metal frame shimmered like moonlight seen through grief. I reached out, touched it, and felt a pulse. Not mechanical, biological, like a heartbeat. Then the back of the machine opened, not like a panel. More like a door. Inside, a small tunnel, circular, lined with tiny floating orbs that blinked when I stared at them. A voice echoed, "You drank truth, barista. Now you must grind through the memory." Inside the tunnel, I crawled in. It wasn't hot. It wasn't cold. It was memory. I saw flashes. My first crush. The moment I stopped believing in forever. The time I watched someone walk away, and I smiled like it didn't hurt. The way I pretend to enjoy being alone. The tunnel twisted, bent around logic, then opened into a room, not a big one, like the break room of a forgotten god. Metal walls, a counter, a grinder in the center, and standing behind it, a being. The being, she, or it, looked like melted glass shaped into a human form. Wearing an apron made of swirling galaxy dust, eyes like brewed espresso, deep, endless, bitter. She spoke without opening her mouth. "I am Dreen, keeper of the emotional circuitry." I tried to speak, but my voice got lost between thoughts. She reached into the grinder, pulled out a bean, and held it up. "Do you know what this is?" I nodded. "A coffee bean?" She smiled. "It's a soul." I blinked. She dropped it into a portafilter, pressed it, pulled a shot. The machine hissed like a snake exhaling regret. She slid the espresso toward me. "Drink, and see why your future is always lonely." I refused. "No," I said. "I already saw enough. I don't want to know more." She tilted her head. "Then leave. But know this, until you finish the shot, the future cannot change. It's written, but not brewed." I turned to go, but before I left, she whispered, "She cried for you, you know, the one who dropped the tear. She knew what it would do." I froze. "Why?" Dreen looked down. "Because she loved you, but wasn't allowed to." Then everything blinked out. Back in the cafe, I woke up in the kitchen, alone, but the grinder was warm, and there was one cup sitting on the counter. Black, still steaming. A note scribbled on the saucer, "Next time you drink, bring a question." There are exactly 23 ways to make espresso taste different. I tried all 23, then invented 12 more. I became a caffeinated alchemist, a foam-swirling prophet, a heartbroken barista with a vengeance. All because of one truth. Every version of me ends up alone. Number not today. Experiment number 1. Oat milk counterspell. I steamed the oat milk counterclockwise. I whispered compliments to the shot while it brewed. I even played romantic jazz. Then I drank it. Result: future vision, sitting on a couch, alone, rewatching Shrek 2, laughing too hard, crying harder. Experiment number 2, cinnamon plus hope. I etched a heart in the crema, sprinkled cinnamon, lit a candle. Result: future vision, same couch, same Shrek, now holding a teddy bear and talking to it like it's my therapist. Experiment number 3, mocha with chocolate from that one store with a French name. You know the one, where you spend $14 on 2 squares and they tell you it's hand-harvested joy. Result: future vision, buying a second teddy bear so the first one isn't lonely. I screamed into a croissant. At this point, I started losing it. Sleep? Overrated. Showers? Optional. I muttered things like, maybe the crema is the prison. Espresso has memory. I can smell my failures. Charlie wouldn't come near me. Even the spoons looked judgmental. And then, I found the old training manual for new baristas, tucked behind the blender. On page 44, in handwriting I didn't recognize, it said, "To break the loop, brew with what you hide." I froze because I knew what that meant. The hidden ingredient, my own tears. Look, I didn't plan to cry into the espresso, but it had been a long week. I brewed the shot, thought about every person who ghosted me, every text left on read, every smile I gave that didn't come back. And then it happened. One tear, plop, into the cup. The crema shimmered gold. For the first time, gold. I took a sip. The vision came fast. Me. In a kitchen I didn't recognize. Someone was cooking behind me, singing off key. I laughed, turned, and saw her. Not just a her, the her, glowing slightly, wearing an apron that said, "Caffeine Queen." She winked. "Finally caught up, huh?" I gasped. Back to reality. I dropped the cup. This time it did break. Shattered into exactly 13 pieces. I counted. 13. Like a warning. Or a door. Then the espresso machine spoke again. The display blinked. "You saw a version that loves you." I nodded, shaking. "Do you want to go there?" I whispered. "Yes." "Then bring a question." I stood in silence, then wrote one on a napkin, folded it, slipped it into my pocket, and turned off the machine. Tomorrow I'd go back, to the room, to Dran, and ask the question I wasn't brave enough to ask before. If I was designed to be alone, why did she cry for me? I came back to ask Dran the question no barista should ever ask a cosmic espresso entity. If love isn't meant for me, then why does it keep showing up in my cup? The grinder room wasn't where I left it. The last time I'd crawled through the espresso machine, it opened like a memory. This time, it fought back. The metal shivered. The counter tilted. The steam hissed like it was having a panic attack in Latin. But I didn't stop. I brewed one shot, no milk, no sugar, and I whispered, "Let me in." The machine sighed, and the back cracked open. Same tunnel, but darker. The orbs no longer blinked. They watched. I crawled through, heart hammering. This time, I brought the napkin, and the question folded inside it. Dran was waiting. Same room, same swirling grinder, same eyes that looked like melted stardust. She didn't smile. "You brewed with your truth. I felt it." I stepped closer. "Then you know why I'm here." She nodded. "You saw the version that loved you." I held up the napkin, unfolded it, read it aloud. If I wasn't built to be loved, then why did she cry for me? Dran closed her eyes. The grinder hummed louder. The room got colder, and then she whispered, "Because you were supposed to be forgotten." "Wait, what?" I laughed. "Excuse me?" Dran stepped forward. "You weren't built to be loved. You were built to hold the memory of love. You're a vessel, a narrative thread, a cautionary tale. You anchor others so they can feel loss, hope, and longing." I stared. "So I'm a coffee-flavored Greek tragedy?" She tilted her head. "Number, you're necessary. Your loneliness makes others brave." I snapped. "Then why do I feel?" I shouted. "Why do I remember the warmth of her hand, the way she laughed at my bad latte art, the glow in her tears?" "She was real," I said. "I didn't imagine her. So why do I always end up alone?" Dran whispered, "Because someone gave you more than you were meant to hold. A flaw, a gift, a sabotage. Call it what you will. But someone broke the code, slipped a feeling into your design. And you've been glitching ever since." I staggered back. "Who?" Dran turned to the grinder, pulled out one glowing bean, held it to her chest. "You're not the only one who cried." Twist Dran poured a shot. It shimmered blue. She handed it to me. "Drink. See who altered your code." I drank. The flavor hit like memory and metal. And then I saw her, the alien, the one who dropped the tear. But this time, she wasn't in the cafe. She was standing before a council, pleading, "Let me give him something. Just one drop. He deserves more. I won't stay. I won't interfere. Just let me remind him what it feels like." The council said nothing. One figure raised a hand and nodded. Back in the room, the cup in my hand was empty. Drain looked at me. "She broke protocol. She gave you a memory that wasn't yours to keep. A taste of love, enough to haunt, not enough to hold. You were never meant to chase her." I looked at the grinder, then at my hands, still trembling. "I'm chasing anyway." The challenge. I stood tall. No more glimpses. I want the path, the timeline, the place where she's real. Drian stared. "If you walk that path, there's no return. You'll lose your ability to see the futures. No more predictions, no more control." I smiled. I never wanted control. I just wanted to be chosen. She nodded and reached behind the grinder, pulled out a key, black, shaped like a question mark. "There's a cafe, hidden between timelines. It only opens when someone dares to ask why they were unloved. You'll find her there. But she may not remember what she gave you." I took the key, slipped it into my apron pocket, turned to leave, then paused. "Drian, who gave you permission to exist?" She blinked. "No one. I built myself from the silence between heartbeats." We smiled at each other. Two beings not designed to feel, learning how to do it anyway. They said it didn't exist. A cafe between timelines, built from heartbreak, run on memory, and open only to those unloved. But I had the key, and I still remembered the taste of her tear. The key burned in my apron pocket, not with heat, with memory. Every time I touched it, I remembered her voice. Not the words, just the shape of them. The way she said bitter like she'd swallowed entire universes and still preferred espresso. I walked, didn't know where, didn't have to, because the door finds you, if you're broken enough, if you've screamed quietly at midnight into your coffee, if you've waited just one more day for nothing, then the door shows up, and mine did. At the back of an alley where Wi-Fi dies and shadows forget to move. A plain wooden door, no handle, no lock, just a plaque. "We remember so you don't have to." I took out the key, shaped like a question mark, inserted it into the grain of the door. It sighed and opened. Inside, the cafe that never was. It smelled like every coffee shop you've ever loved and lost. Cinnamon, ink, old books, new hope. The floor creaked in patterns. The mugs floated gently above each table, steaming softly like they had secrets to share. And at the center, a long bar, and behind it, her. Not a mirage, not a memory. Her. Hair pulled up, apron smudged with galaxies. She was wiping a mug that shimmered slightly, as if it was trying not to be real. She didn't look up, didn't see me, didn't recognize me. I froze. Approach, I walked to the bar, sat down, heartbeat in my throat. She placed the mug in front of me, not meeting my eyes. Voice soft. "What are you hoping to forget today?" I opened my mouth, closed it, then whispered, "You." She froze, looked up, met my gaze, and nothing happened. No spark, no gasp, just confusion. "I'm sorry, have we met?" I smiled, aching. "Not yet." Conversation. She poured me a drink. Dark, smooth, no vision, just warmth. "You have the key," she said. "Not many make it here. Most give up before the door shows up." I asked, "What is this place?" She wiped the counter. "A holding space for those between endings and beginnings. A resting stop for people whose stories were paused, but never unpaused." I stared at her. Her voice, her movements, identical. But something was missing. Her eyes. They didn't hold memory. They held purpose. She wasn't my version of her. Not yet. I asked, "Do you remember giving someone a tear?" She paused, brows furrowed. "We're not supposed to. We're designed to assist, pour, heal, move on." I leaned in. "You broke that. You gave me more. You changed my code." Her hands trembled. That's impossible. I, I wouldn't. That's not allowed, I whispered. But you did. And slowly, her eyes widened, not in recognition, in grief. Oh no. You remember me. The fracture. A tremor rippled through the cafe. Mugs shook. The lights flickered. The plaque on the wall cracked. She whispered, "You weren't supposed to find me. If we reconnect, this whole place unravels." I stood, tears in my throat. I don't care. I'm not going back to a world where I'm the only one who remembers. If you lose this place, I said, you lose me again. She took my hand, and the cafe screamed. Collapsed chairs spun, time melted, tables burned with past conversations, memories unzipped from walls. I shouted, "Just remember me." She whispered, "I'm trying." And then, silence. We stood in nothing. The cafe gone. Just her, and me, and the space between us. She reached out, touched my face. "I don't know your name," she said, "but my heart remembers the shape of your sorrow." I cried. She smiled. "Start again with me? One drink at a time?" I nodded. And in that void, a table appeared. 2 cups, steam curling upward like promises. She didn't remember me, but she remembered the weight of someone missing. So we did what 2 almost lovers do when the universe forgets. We made coffee and tried again. The cafe was gone, but something new took its place. A floating island of tile and silence. 1 espresso machine, 2 stools, and a table built from memory we hadn't earned yet. She poured the first cup. Black. No sugar. Just the way she'd served it the day her tear changed everything. Only this time, it didn't glow, because this version of her didn't cry for me. Not yet. Conversation over coffee. Her name, she told me, was Kari, not Yari, not quite, but close enough to bruise me. I wasn't supposed to have a name, she said, but I woke up with one, as if someone whispered it into my circuits before I was born. I smiled. Someone did. She looked at me, half curious, half afraid. You know who I was? I nodded. Not all of you. Just the part that got away. She stirred her coffee slowly. Then tell me something true. I leaned in. I used to serve coffee to people who believed I could tell their future. Could you? Number. But I always hoped one of them would see mine. Every day, 1 cup we brewed, we drank. We didn't talk about the tear, or the grinder, or the cafe that imploded because we dared to hold hands between timelines. Instead, we practiced, learning to speak in sips, to flirt with foam art, to laugh at the silence. She told me about her first dream, walking backward through a thunderstorm and never getting wet. I told her about my last nightmare, being happy and waking up before I could find out why. Somehow those fit together, like spoons in the same drawer. The sugar incident. On the 7th cup, something changed. Kari handed me the mug with a grin. Don't stir this one, just drink. I took a sip, paused, looked down, and gasped. The sugar at the bottom of the cup had formed 3 letters. U. I looked at her. She froze. I didn't do that. The table vibrated. The air shimmered. The espresso machine whirred without being touched. Something was awakening. Again. The voice returns. From the steam wand, a voice, not Kari's, whispered, You've crossed too many versions. You're creating recursion. You were supposed to choose one. Kari stepped back. What does that mean? I stood, hands trembling. It means I brought too much of you with me. More than one version. I didn't leave her behind. She came with me. Flash of memory. Suddenly, Kari collapsed, but not in pain, in sync. Her eyes shimmered, silver, then gold, then that impossible glowing blue. I remember, she gasped. I remember being her. I remember the tear, the cafe, the kiss that never happened. You crossed time to find me. And I wept, because I'd broken the rules, because I hadn't known I brought a fragment of her from every vision I'd seen. And now, they were all converging. Kari fully awakened. She looked at me, held my hand, and said, I wasn't built to love one person. I was scattered to keep the memory of love from breaking. But you, she placed my palm on her chest, you brought me back. Not as Yari, not as Kari, as me, the version that chooses. The real cafe form's light returned, walls unfolded, tables grew like vines. People appeared, just shadows at first, then memories, then real. We were back in the cafe, but it wasn't between timelines anymore. It was ours, a real place. In one reality, in this one. A cafe for the forgotten, run by two people who refused to forget. We thought we were safe, that we'd outrun the timelines, stitched ourselves a little corner of reality made from second chances. But then he came in and said she was never mine to begin with. The cafe had windows now, not metaphors, real, actual windows. Sunlight filtered in like it forgave us. Kari planted succulents along the counter. Charlie returned and curled in a cup sink. And I smiled more often than I questioned. We served coffee that didn't tell the future, just the present, the kind that smelled like cinnamon and meant, you're still here. But peace doesn't knock when it enters. It just steps aside and lets the past in. He arrived on a Tuesday. Of course he did. Rain outside, naturally. But this man didn't get wet. His coat repelled water like rejection. He had no shadow and no scent. But when he stepped in, every spoon in the cafe vibrated. Kari looked up, froze, whispered, "It's him." My stomach dropped. "The council?" I asked. She shook her head. "Worse. He's the programmer." The conversation. He sat at the far end of the bar, didn't order, just placed a cup on the counter. It was empty, but it steamed. He spoke softly. This construct was never meant to achieve identity. She was built to distribute calibrated affection, targeted resonance, nothing more. Kari stepped forward, trembling. "I'm not your tool anymore." He looked at her. No anger, no warmth, just data. "You've fractured, you've integrated anomalies. You were my cleanest design, the only one who never questioned purpose. Then he served you coffee." He looked at me, eyes like cold architecture. "You gave her choice. That wasn't yours to give." I spoke. "She gave me something too. Hope." He didn't blink. "You're an anchor, a memory holder, the empty cup others drink from. You were never meant to be remembered." I laughed. "Then why do I still taste like her tear?" The threat. He placed a vial on the counter, black, still, humming slightly. "This will restore her to factory state. No glitch, no longing. No love." Kari stepped back. "No." He didn't move. "Use it. Or I'll collapse this cafe and every version of it in every thread. Even the ones you haven't dreamed yet." Kari's decision. She reached for the vial, touched it, then pushed it toward me. "If you think I was better before I knew you, pour it. But if I'm more than a program, if I'm someone who chose to stay, then don't." My hands trembled. The programmer said nothing. The room held its breath. I walked to the grinder, brewed one final espresso. The crema shimmered with every memory we'd built. I looked at Kari, poured the shot into her cup. No black vial, no reboot. Just love, warm and bitter and earned. She drank and smiled. "Still tastes like us." The programmer shuddered, his outline flickered. His voice softened. "You've rewritten a foundational loop. You've chosen meaning over design." He stood. "You will be allowed to continue, but there will be consequences." Kari stepped forward. "Then we'll brew through them." He vanished, leaving only steam and the faint outline of a shadow he never had. That night we locked up. No timeline collapse, no cosmic resets, just two people washing cups and laughing and maybe falling in love, one espresso at a time. There are many kinds of deliveries a cafe can receive. A bad shipment of beans, a mysterious muffin no one ordered. But when someone walks in holding a cup from a timeline that hasn't happened yet and says it's from me, things get weird. It was a quiet morning, the kind where the crema settled perfectly. Kari was humming, something not from Earth, but somehow nostalgic. Charlie was asleep in the pastry display. I was restocking mugs when the door chimed. The man who entered looked tired, not exhausted, not sleepy, but tired of knowing. He placed a cup on the counter, old, worn, glowing faintly at the rim. I recognized it instantly, because I own it. Now, but this version was aged, scorched slightly, as if it had survived something I hadn't lived through yet. He looked at me, eyes wide, desperate. You don't know me, but I'm you. And this is the warning. The cup, I touched it. It was still warm. Steam curled up like a memory resisting erasure. Kari came closer, hand brushing mine. What is this? I turned the cup. On the base, scribbled in my handwriting, don't let her follow you. My breath stopped. The conversation with myself. The man, me 20 years later, sat across the counter. Didn't order. Just watched Kari like someone remembering a ghost that used to laugh. I crossed the threshold, he said. I couldn't help it. We were too happy. I wanted more. I chased a deeper version, another path. But there's a place where she doesn't come back. Kari looked at him, then at me. Why wouldn't I come back? Old me shook his head. Because in that version, we become real too fast. We burn too brightly. The universe collapses the loop to correct it. You disappear, like foam in bad milk. I asked the only thing that mattered. Why bring this now? He placed a small sugar packet on the table. On it scribbled, it's your last chance to not make the same mistake. Kari stepped forward. What was the mistake? Old me looked at her, eyes soft, ruined. I didn't believe your love was strong enough to stay, so I kept trying to test it. One test too many, and I broke the loop. You vanished, Kari responds. She stood tall, radiant, whole. I'm not her, I'm me. I remember now. Not just the tear, not just the cafe. I remember every version that loved him, left him, lost him. And I stayed. This time I chose. The cup shimmered, light bent. A sound like a spoon being set down after a long argument rippled through the room. Old me vanished, leaving only the cup and a note inside. Then stop questioning and live. Aftermath, I placed the cup on the shelf. Didn't touch it again. Kari and I brewed in silence. But it wasn't awkward. It was intentional. Every movement, every sip was a choice. Not a prediction, not a glitch. Just presence. That night, Kari reached for my hand. I'm not afraid of the future anymore, I asked. Why? She smiled. Because we stopped drinking it. We started making it instead. And maybe that's all love ever was. A choice you brew fresh every day and never reheat. He walked in like he owned the past and spoke like he regretted every second of it. When someone says they invented time, you don't ask what kind of coffee they want. You ask what they came to erase. The door opened in reverse. That was the first sign. The chime rang before it swung. The light outside dimmed. Not darker, just older. He walked in. Tall. Coat stitched from ticking clock hands. Hair a moving blur, like sand slipping in an hourglass. Eyes gray, like stone that remembered rain. He sat at the bar, placed a single coin down. It had no number, just an engraving. If lost, return to before. Kari froze. She looked at him, gasped. That's him, I whispered. Who? The architect. The one who built time before emotion existed. I blinked. Time had a version before emotion? Kari whispered. Yes. It was perfect, precise, cold. Then someone broke it, gave time the ability to miss things. I stared. You? She shook her head. Number you. He spoke. His voice crackled like fire, forgetting how to be warm. I want a refund. I blinked. A refund? On what? Love. I allowed it once. As a variable. A wild card. I let time ache. It was your idea. He pointed at me. Kari stepped forward. He doesn't remember. He wasn't meant to, but his emotions burned through containment, created recursion. Created me. I spoke. So what do you want now? He looked at Kari. Her. She's the embodiment of lost time, of all the seconds poured into someone who didn't stay. If I take her back, the timeline stabilizes. No more longing, no more endless brewing. Kari whispered, no more us. The bargain. He offered me the coin. Flip this. If it lands on before, you keep her, but time forgets everything you were. If it lands on after, I take her, but you remember her forever. My hands shook. Kari placed her hand over mine. Don't flip it. We don't need chance anymore. We choose. The coin glowed faintly, then crumbled to dust. The truth revealed. He stood, unshaken, but slower. You've rewritten me. By loving something that shouldn't exist, you made it realer than the laws that rejected it. Time can no longer undo you. He turned, paused at the door. But beware. Love that survives logic creates echoes. Then he was gone. Echoes. Later that night, I heard spoons clink in the drawer, unsupervised. The lights flickered, but in reverse. Kari kissed me. Software. Long. Like an apology for all the timelines where she vanished. And in that moment, I knew love isn't a moment, it's a loop. But this time we weren't stuck in it. We were building it. I've seen many versions of myself. Alone, laughing, even glowing once. But the version who walked in that day, he didn't need to speak, because silence, when brewed long enough, becomes grief. It was a slow afternoon. Sunlight spilled through the windows like syrup. Kari was arranging cups by color. Yes, she'd invented a spectrum only she could see. Charlie was curled in the sink, muttering dreams in French. And me? I was behind the counter, finally, peaceful, until the door opened, and I walked in. Or someone who looked like me, hair a little shorter, eyes duller, shoulders lower. He sat at the bar, didn't speak, didn't blink, just stared. At Kari, then at me, the order I approached cautiously. Hi there, I said. He didn't smile, didn't nod, just whispered, decaf. That one word felt wrong. Foreign in a place built on intensity. But I made it, served it, watched him stare at the cup like it held the ending he didn't get. He sipped, then said, she's not supposed to exist. The conversation with myself. Again. I leaned closer. What version are you? He smiled faintly. It cracked like a wound. The one that stayed obedient. That never followed the tear, never drank the shot, never asked why he was alone. Kari came closer, looked at him, then whispered, you're the one the council kept. He nodded. I lived a long life, efficient, safe, structured. I was rewarded, upgraded, even invited to the inner machine. But I never tasted a name, never felt someone make coffee for me, just because. What he wanted, I asked. So why are you here? He placed a napkin on the counter. On it, scrawled in chaotic handwriting, I want her memory. Kari froze. I whispered, you can't have that. You are that, he said to her. You're built from longing. I'm built from logic. Let me touch her hand, once, and I'll remember what I lost without losing what I am. Kari looked at me, then at him, then nodded. The touch. It lasted 1 second. His fingertips grazed hers. No glow, no light, just warmth. But his reaction, he collapsed. Not physically, emotionally. He shook, breathed like he'd forgotten how. Then wept. Not for her, not for himself. For the silence he'd lived in so long, he mistook it for peace. Before he left, he looked up. I thought I was the optimized version. Now I know. I was the archived one. He stood, left the decaf half-finished. At the door, he paused. Don't waste what you have, even if it vanishes. Then he vanished. No chime, just stillness. Aftermath. Kari held my hand. You saw it, didn't you? She asked. I nodded. He's what I could have become. She said, and yet you didn't. I said, only because you cried. This is the last cup, the one that wasn't meant to predict anything or protect anyone. Just a drink between two people who knew that love, like coffee, is most honest when it's made for now. The morning was unusually quiet. Even the espresso machine, always grumbling like an old poet, sat still. Kari stood at the window, watching people pass who didn't know they were walking beside a love that had rewritten time. I knew today was different, because she hadn't touched the cups, hadn't kissed the rim of the mug she always claimed made lattes taste like rebellion. She just watched. The unspoken. I brewed coffee the way she liked it. Rich, simple, no foam art. Not today. She turned to me, eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. You know what's happening, don't you? I nodded. You're fading. She stepped closer. Number I'm returning. To the place that built me, to the timelines that still need something to believe in. I'm a memory, a mechanic of longing, a piece of emotional infrastructure. And I stayed longer than I was supposed to. I tried to smile. How long? She shrugged. A few minutes. Or maybe a few lifetimes. Time always behaves around people it's loved. The final cup. We sat at the table, her hand warm in mine. I pushed the cup toward her. She sipped, smiled. You didn't add cinnamon. I didn't want to sweeten the end. She laughed softly. It's not the end. It's just where the page stops turning. What she left. She stood, took my hand, placed it over her heart. You'll still hear me, she whispered, in the hiss of milk frothing, in the pause before someone says your name, in the second cup you almost didn't drink. And then she kissed me, one last time, not with promise, not with regret, but with presence, and faded, like steam leaving a cup you forgot to finish. Afterward, I kept the cafe open, not for magic, not for memory, but for mornings, for people who don't know they're looking for something until they sip it. I don't brew the future anymore. I brew the now. And sometimes, just sometimes, I see a shimmer behind the espresso machine, a soft hum in the grinder, and I know she's still choosing me, one cup at a time. If love walked away but promised to find you again in every ordinary moment, would you keep the cup warm? Would you keep believing? Let me know in the comments. And next time, I'll tell you what happened when I spilled truth serum into the regulars table, and they all confessed things they were never supposed to say.